everybody. It's Dave here, Darren over there. We're your two old bloggers. Been publicly commenting on the Minnesota Vikings, your Minnesota Vikings, for over 2.5 decades apiece. It's a long time. We started out with the written word, and now we're doing it in the visual. So, we have a show today, and we're going to talk about the drama of the week. Sam Darnold. All the stories, all the propaganda, all the dreams and schemes or nightmares that took place and still could, we're going to go over. And then we're going to get into this week in Vikings land. And we have a few topics to go over, including Theo Jackson's re-up. Yes, we are doing that. He's not the only one. We just got word before the show that Aaron Jones signed a 2-year, $20 million with 13 guaranteed. We'll probably briefly discuss that as well, even though we're not prepped for it. We're going to talk about J.J. McCarthy and who's going to back him up. Could it be Sam Darnold? And what have the Chicago Bears been doing? And then we're going to get into a position review. Not just any position, because time is short. We're getting into the entire defense. All next on Two Old Bloggers. Let's rock! Vikings First and SKOL presents This Week in Vikings Land with Darren and Dave, your two old bloggers. Hey, everybody, it's me, Dave, and Darren over there. Darren, how are things in the Great White North?
Beautiful day here, Dave. Just like everybody else, or most people, some places don't have daylight saving times, but we do up here in the Northwest Territory. So 8 a.m. came early today, an hour earlier.
Well, I got up and I thought, oh shit, I slept late. Nope.
Sombrero Northwest.
But
Ding.
John says tomorrow is Christmas. Well, tomorrow's the first, it's legal tampering, but it's the first we can hear a player has agreed to a deal. That deal isn't in stone until they put pen on paper, which will be after Wednesday or Wednesday afternoon at 3 p.m. Central is when they could do that. So, but I agree with you. Hopefully we will get many, many great presents under our tree. Now, let's get this show rolling. As soon as there we go. With theme 1. And theme 1. Drama week. Sam
Darnold, David, and everybody else. Yes. What would a week be on the show without us talking about the quarterback position on the Vikings? I just don't know what we would do if we didn't get to talk about it. But this week, March 4th came and went, Dave. No, the Vikings decided not to play tag with Sam Darnold. That is slapping the franchise tag on him. And they didn't. So no franchise tag, no tag and trade. And that was what we felt was like going to be the best. What would have been the best outcome for the Vikings, it seemed, when you're low in draft capital, is you slap the franchise tag on Sam Darnold, trade him for draft capital in 2025 and maybe a player too, And when you only have potentially 4 draft picks in this draft, and it would give us better more draft capital, armed with more draft capital for this draft, which we need. But it didn't happen. And Dave, you talked about it earlier in the week, that this was always going to be a tricky thing to do for a few reasons up there. Like, first off, you got to find a team that's willing to trade for him. 2, you got to agree on the compensation, and the Vikings have to be good with that compensation. And then if you do work out the parameters of a deal, Sam Darnold also would have had to be in on this whole thing and agree to go to that team and sign what we would expect is that team would want to sign him to a multi-year extension, lower the cap hit this year and have him more certainty at the quarterback position beyond that. So that's a lot of stuff, a lot of balls that have to in the air, a lot of things we got to sort out.
The Jets would have said yes, and Sam would have said no.
Yes. And there's other teams, the Browns potentially, or other teams that he also could have said no. And so, again, was always going to be a tough way to thread the needle. The Vikings weren't able to do that, and so when that happened, though, all hell broke loose amongst NFL insiders about Sam Darnold. What was his future going to be? Where is he? What are the Vikings going to do? Where is he going to go? Where is he not going to go? And so to recap, earlier on the week, once the franchise tag, it was clear that it wasn't going to happen. You had Ian Rappaport saying that the Vikings were trying to do all they could to bring him back. Adam Schefter was also on there too, saying about how the most sensible thing seemed for the Vikings to bring Sam Darnold back. Tom Pelissero was on that too. As of Friday, he said the Vikings had a deal on the table with Sam Darnold. Well, and then Mike Florio, he never said that the Vikings were looking to bring Darnold back, but he did say if it happened and if it was a multi-year deal, then that was going to upset J.J. McCarthy, and then J.J. McCarthy, if that happened, was going to request a trade out of Minnesota. LOL.
I think Mike Florio may be hitting the gummies a little hard.
Yeah, it is quite possible, Dave. A little bit too much tea, cannabis, or whatever. In those gummies. But like I said, that was the insider stuff. And like for the Vikings to do the tag and trade, Dave, or put a franchise tag on it, that we learned, that wouldn't have made a whole lot of financial sense for the Vikings, considering the draft picks that they have going into 2025 and the amount of holes that they have on the roster and free agents that they have that they need to either bring back or new ones to replace those that we're going to lose. Because if you place the franchise tag on Sam Darnold, and it would be $40.2 million, I think it was the franchise number for a quarterback. Even if you trade him, that goes on your cap in 2025. That's going to reduce the amount of, and that would reduce the amount of cap that you have available to sign other free agents come Wednesday. I just don't think that the Vikings, with the amount of free agents that they had now, that was a road that they felt that they could go down through this year. Other years, if you had less holes, less free agents, not as many needs, maybe it's something you could do. And so, then you've got Friday happens, the Geno Smith trade happens, and everything really, really changes, right? Because with Darnold, with Smith being traded, last year when Kirk Cousins was the quarterback, the Vikings, Dave, you said it, this was looking like what the Vikings did with Darnold this year is right out of the same playbook that they used with Kirk Cousins last year, where you say very nice things about your free agent to be quarterback, how you loved working with him, how you loved having him on the team, how how you felt he played really well for you. And still, the Vikings, despite saying all that, let Kirk Cousins walk.
But you've got a key component of it, that they offered Kirk Cousins a contract.
Yes.
Just like Pelissero said, there's an offer on the table for Sam Darnold. Now, that offer, I'm sure, is low, purposely low. So But yes.
And I'll be on the record about this, is that if Sam Darnold wanted to come back to Minnesota, Dave, I would be fine with that on these terms. 1 year, let's say, okay, the cap's gone up, so let's adjust it to like 11 million or 12 million per year. And he agrees to compete with JJ McCarthy for the starting job. Well, that was never going to happen. He's never going to do that. And this whole thing the insider's saying about how Darnold's market was not as robust as they thought early last week, the stuff about that coming out, that sounds to me like it must be NFC North GMs and scouts from the Lions, the Packers, and the Bears feeding Rappaport and Pelissero that kind of information so they can somehow panic Kwesi Adofo-Mensah into signing Darnold for a larger sum than they would want. Like, Darnold's young. He's just coming off a Pro Bowl year. He's more mobile than you think, and he's always been durable and healthy when he's been played. He was going to have, and he is going to have, a market. And I think a pretty sizable one for amongst the NFL. So I never bought into that. And then the Geno Smith trade, cements it. Now you're looking at, okay, what was the market? Was there an obvious team that he would go to? Before that trade, I would have said Las Vegas was obvious for cap reasons. They were quarterback needy. They had a new head coach who's not interested in rebuilding, and I think it wants to win right now. Well, Las Vegas answered that by trading for Smith. And so now I think, once again, you've got an obvious candidate for Darnold to go to. And once it happened on Friday, all those same NFL insiders immediately pivoted and say Darnold is not expected to go back to the Vikings now. He is, the Seahawks are targeting him. And I can see why.
Almost like it's a done deal and it's been previously talked about, but hasn't been released yet.
Yeah. But, last year with when the Vikings let Kirk Cousins go, the whole thing about bringing Darnold back never made a lot of sense to me or you, Dave, and we talked about it on the show. But the Vikings letting Kirk Cousins go like they did last year, actually, the Vikings, I think, were in a more precarious situation at quarterback, in that if they let Cousins go, they had Nick Mullins was on the roster and Jaron Hall were on the roster as your quarterbacks. We knew they were going to draft a quarterback in the NFL draft, but they couldn't be sure who they were going to get or when they were going to get that quarterback. Was it going to be first round, second round? You couldn't be sure. The other thing was that the Vikings, when they let Kirk Cousins go, they ended up signing Darnold to a bridge, and everybody thought, most people thought, Darnold sucks. So, and yet they still let Cousins go, who had been very productive quarterback for 6 years for us. This year, at least, you've got JJ McCarthy sitting there. You've worked with him for a year. He looked good in training camp, in OTAs, great progression, had a very brief glimpse of him in the preseason game against Las Vegas, looked really good there. He's ready to start, I think. So why do you bring Darnold back as your starter when McCarthy's sitting there? Just doesn't make any sense, especially when you got to pay Darnold what you're going to have to pay him. So the Seattle thing is really like a gift from heaven for the Vikings, I think, in a way, because again, Darnold's going to go there, and you're potentially going to be able to recoup a comp pick in 2026 for Darnold now wherever he signs. And I think that Smith deal, Dave, also kind of shows like why the Vikings, partly why they decided not to do the tag and trade. They obviously found at the combine that either teams weren't interested in doing a deal at all. But to see that Smith, who, he's older than Darnold, but he has a longer track record of being good in the NFL than Darnold has, although he wasn't as good last year as Darnold was. But he's had 3 pretty solid years as a starter in Seattle. Darnold had 1. And yet a quarterback needy team like the Raiders only had to give up a 3rd rounder for Geno Smith to come over there. So that tells you that our thoughts that Darnold you could get a 1st rounder or even a 2nd rounder for Darnold was never in the cards. And so the best you could get was a 3rd rounder this year. I think Kwesi Adofo-Mensah looked at it and I was like, well, if I'm going to eat up $40 million in salary cap, even if I trade him, and I only get a third rounder back, and maybe it was even less than that, then you're probably better off letting him walk, and you potentially get a comp pick, which could be a third rounder at best. It's a year later, but it wouldn't be a whole lot different than the value of the pick that you would have got this year. So whole bunch of reasons why this didn't happen. And yet, maybe they'll still sign Darnold Day, but you got to feel that if there was going to be a deal, it would have happened by now, because we're just a few hours from the legal tampering and word leaking out about, what player is going where and for how much.
Yep. And I agree. And now I did some research via Grok, and they're expecting Sam to get a $30 to $35 million a year, three-year deal. So that's not what we wanted him for. So let him go.
No.
Let the J.J. McCarthy era start. And that's what's going to happen. So
it is, and maybe that's what was always going to happen, Dave. From the day that this Viking season ended, despite all the talk, and we never heard Kevin O'Connell or Kwesi Adofo-Mensah specifically commit to Sam Darnold being back with the Vikings in 2025. Not once. Said lots of nice things about him, but they never once committed to that. Just like they never once committed to Kirk Cousins being on the team in 2024.
Yep. But
we
will find out for sure this week where Sam Darnold ends up. Hopefully it's Seattle. That's perfectly fine by me. So, and it makes them happy because they don't have the draft picks to go get one of the two top quarterbacks in the draft. So
they do not. And hey, they got a up close and personal look at Sam Darnold last year at Lumen Field. Darnold went 22 for 35 in that game, 246 yards, 3 touchdown passes, no interceptions, had a QBR of 78 point something, a quarterback rating of over 113. And hey, his last play in the game, he escapes heavy pressure on the run, throws a dart to Justin Jefferson for the game-winning touchdown. That had to make an impression on Mike Macdonald, the head coach, and John Schneider, the general manager in Seattle. And that's probably one little reason why Sam Darnold will probably be a Seahawk in a couple of days.
Mm-hmm. Now, I read today that Aaron Rodgers is in play for Seattle. Sure. I've also read today that Aaron Rodgers may not get a team because the whole league's turned down on him. Aaron Rodgers is a dark horse to back up J.J. McCarthy. Heck, I heard Kirk Cousins could come back to back up. I don't see it, but this was about Sam Darnold and his future. We will find out for sure this week.
We will. Tony's back with us. Tony Bell, he's talking about how Darnold won't have, if he signs with the Seahawks, he won't have anybody to throw to. Well, Jackson Smith and Jigba broke out last year. He's won. DK Metcalf has not been traded yet. He's requested a trade, but so did Myles Garrett, and Garrett just signed a mega extension with the Browns today. So is Metcalf out the door? Not so sure. And if Metcalf is out the door, there's going to be, a fairly sizable compensation back to get to whoever trades for him. They're going to have to give up at least a second rounder, I think. And that draft capital is going to help the Seahawks draft a wide receiver to replace DK Metcalf. Maybe he won't be as productive in year one, but they'd be targeting a wide receiver in the draft and also in free agency. So remains to be seen what the Seahawks wide receiver room will look like when the season starts. But I think it's a little early to say that Darnold has no one to throw to at this point. And Smith and Jigba is coming back next year, and he caught almost 100 passes last year.
Mm-hmm. So, hey, it is what it is. Now on to theme 2. This week in Vikings land. And we're going to start off with, I have no graphics for it because it just broke before the show, Aaron Jones was signed to a 2-year extension and $13 million guaranteed. How do you feel about that, Darren?
And Dave, I want to hear how you feel about it too, and everybody else on here, which has already been discussed a little bit. But I love Aaron Jones. I always did. Well, I loved him and hated him when he was in Green Bay, but I knew he was a hell of a good running back, and that he killed us. And last year he had a very good season for the Vikings. His single season best as a rushing yards happened last year with the Vikings. I didn't think he'd be back just because I felt that the Vikings would play he's 30, going to be 31 in December. It's time to cut bait. But he doesn't have a whole lot of tread on his tires for a guy that age. You could make the argument that he does have something left, although the history of 30-year-olds being productive in the NFL is not very extensive. But I still, great teammate, team culture guy, one of the best you'll find in the league, outstanding human being. Does that help you on the football field? Well, maybe a little, but he's a great pass protector and a great pass catcher out of the backfield. I think those things carry over even if you get older. And running wise, I did not see Jones being really any lesser a guy last year than I had seen in the previous couple. Still looked like he had some burst, maybe not like in his rookie year, but it's still there. He, like every running back, he needs a few holes to run through. And last year, unfortunately, there were not a whole lot of holes to run through thanks to the offensive line. And maybe that changes as well. But he's got an impressive track record. I think the Vikings felt doing this. They clearly felt some security with Aaron Jones and bringing him back. And they feel that he can produce close to what he did last year. So I'm happy with them bringing him back. The compensation is a little bit more than I would have loved. He made $7 million last year in a 1-year deal. Now he's going to average about $10 million per year over the 2 years. Don't know how the contract is structured yet.
$13 million guaranteed, so it might be, 6.5, 7 plus incentives.
Yeah, but still. It's a gamble, obviously, with his age, but based on what I saw last year, I don't feel the fall off is going to be that big. And Kevin O'Connell has said quite plainly that they don't want to use Aaron Jones as much in 2025 as they did last year, that there's going to be some sort of running back by committee that they'd like to establish anyway. Somebody commented that it looks like this signing means they're going to run it back with Akers, Chandler, and Jones. I don't think that's going to happen. I think I'm fairly confident they're going to draft a running back in April. What round they draft them in, we don't know, but I think they're going to do that, and they're going to, because it's a deep running back class, and there are good players to be had, even if you don't get them in the first round. So Jones is going to be paired with a rookie, and I think Chandler will be around as well. And that rookie, if he's as good as the Vikings really identify and land a good one, no matter what round it is, that rookie is going to be able to carry the ball 8 to 10 times a game and be productive doing so. And Jones will only have to carry it 15 to 17 times a game. Mm-hmm. Risk here, but like you said, structure of the contract might mean that even though it's reported at $20 million right now, it might not actually be the $10 million a year I just said. It might be very close to the $7 million, $8 million range, very close to what he earned last year.
Right, and there's probably an out after next year. However, you're going to pay up to that $13 million. That's guaranteed. And I agree with you. I think we're going to draft somebody, and we'll probably pick up a couple more as UDFAs, or at least one more as UDFAs, because the class is so deep, and hope to hit on those guys if not. But you can't always bank on a rookie running back to take the field or take the league by storm. They're just like any position. If you get one and they are very, very good, that's a unicorn. So, but I think it's a good move. It solidifies it. It's not, spectacular, but it allows Minnesota, we're closer to going BPA on that first pick. which
That's
is
right.
always a good thing.
And the other thing to keep in mind is that what the free agent running back class this year in the NFL is not very good. There was a rumor that the Vikings were in on Najee Harris. Well, I would be all out on Najee Harris because he's not as good as running back as Aaron Jones is, even Aaron Jones at 30. He's averaged 3.9 yards per carry his entire career. This is Harris. He's a power back who's kind of mediocre as a running back. At least he has been in his years at the NFL with the Steelers. I wouldn't be committing big money or any kind of serious money to Najee Harris. Even I'd rather have Aaron Jones back, and now he is back.
Mm-hmm. And that brings us to the next extension, actually, which took place first this week. Theo Jackson.
Yeah, I wonder if anybody else was surprised that this happened. I was pleasantly surprised, actually, because I like this extension. Theo Jackson sounds like, according to Kevin Seifert, that he's signed through 2027. So 2025, 2026, and 2027, even though it was a 2-year extension. But in that 2-year extension's at $12.6 million he got, an average of $6.3 million per year. And, that is, I like the signing. And that is, I think, a significant signing because that is, I believe, starter money, Dave. It is definitely not backup money for Theo Jackson. And that indicates to me that Cam Bynum must be the odd man out here because Theo Jackson is listed as Cam Bynum's backup at free safety on the ESPN.com Vikings depth chart, which isn't always correct, but I feel that that's where they got him listed. And so, that kind of provided, that signing, I think on Friday, provided an answer to a couple of questions along the safety side. And I like the signing because one, I think Jackson, anyway, but one thing about Cam Bynum, I like Cam Bynum. I think he's a good player, but he's not a great player. Last year, his PFF ranking was 63, which was like, I think, 90th out of 170 safeties, kind of middle of the road. The year before, they had him at 73.2, which is much better. But, he's a guy that Flores has used as a deep safety. He doesn't get sent on blitzes. He's there to patrol the deep part of the field. A very smart player, great locker room guy as well. And not unimportantly to me, he is one of the players that he was one of the players the Vikings got with one of the draft picks they acquired in the trade for Stephon Diggs. So when you got Justin Jefferson and then Bynum for that trade, Bynum is the reason why I think the Vikings actually won that trade, because they got a superstar wide receiver and they also got a solid starter out of that trade. So worked out good for them. But still, Bynum is projected to get maybe 13, 14 million average. You've seen some projections over multiple years at safety. I'm not comfortable committing, or better. I'm not comfortable committing that amount of money to a good but not great player when we've got lots of other mouths to feed on this roster right now. And another reason I'm comfortable with, I like the Jackson signing, is because to me, Jackson can do what Bynum can do on the field. Anytime the Vikings have used Theo Jackson and had him play, and it hasn't been much, only 222 defensive snaps in 3 seasons with the Vikings, but anytime they have had him in there, he's made plays. People will remember the game-sealing interception he had against Seattle, but they might forget that a couple of series before that, on a third down play, on 3rd and 19, he comes up and makes a stop on a dump-off pass, stopped it for 3 or 4 yards that forced about a 60-yard field goal by Jason Myers that would have tied the game, that ended up coming up short. If Theo Jackson doesn't make that play, maybe things turn out a little bit differently overall in the game. So I like Theo Jackson. I think he's been productive, and he's ready to start. And I think right now it answers some questions about the Vikings safety position. I think Jackson's going to be your starter at free safety. You got Josh Metellus, who is a safety, but has a larger role than that on the Brian Flores defense. He's going to still play a lot. And then the only question right now is, and we'll talk about it later, is what happens with what's up with Hitman Harrison Smith? Is he coming back or is he not coming back? But like the signing of Jackson, and I think he's going to do very well in a starting role, in an expanded role for the Vikings in 2025, and we won't miss Cam Bynum all that much.
I 100% agree. I thought it was a good signing. It sort of has keys to the Metellus signing, where they signed him early to be doing stuff that he isn't used to. Now, it's starter money, but it's low-end starter money. And does that mean because Brian Flores uses a variety of defensive packages, he's not going to see the field the whole time, but maybe he could, and we'll see. But I think he's ready for it. And just like they saw Josh Metellus was ready for the role, I think this was a very good signing, and it was relatively cheap.
Which you always like. And you're getting into it a little bit, Dave, but another reason why I like this is because I have confidence we talk about how the Vikings have been able to develop offensive linemen, but at the safety position, they have actually shown that they can develop guys. They did it with Cam Bynum. They did it with Josh Metellus. And even though we didn't draft Theo Jackson, we plucked him off the Tennessee practice squad and have developed him for 3 years. And now we're doing it again with Theo Jackson. Get some seasoning for a year or two, and then you move up. And if you show you've got the goods, plus with the good coaching, you get elevated to a larger role on this defense. And that's what's happening with Theo Jackson. And with the way we've done it again with Metellus and Bynum, I'm confident this is going to work.
Mm-hmm. I am too. I think it's going to go swimmingly, and I'm all for that. And we'll talk more about this briefly and when we get to the defense. But all right, next topic. Was Sam Darnold's future, who is going to back up J.J. McCarthy?
Yes. If Sam Darnold signs with another team, and he will, the Vikings are going to need, they're going to turn the starting quarterback job over to J.J. McCarthy. Clearly, excuse me, as I burp into the mic. Should have muted myself there. But yes. And if with McCarthy being your starter, being in a second year, having not played an NFL regular season game, you're going to want an experienced backup quarterback behind him who has an ability to start and be productive. In case McCarthy's first season has some rough spots, doesn't go well, or he gets injured, God forbid, you want that experienced guy there. And so I think the plan A for the Vikings, it's been stated, is that they would bring back Daniel Jones, who would serve as the backup for J.J. McCarthy. However, we're learning that Jones may have other opportunities in the NFL. Apparently, the Colts are very interested in him right now, even though they've got Anthony Richardson, but they've made it known that they're going to push Richardson this year, and apparently they've got their eye on Jones as being the guy to push him. I don't know if Jones would be willing to come back to the Vikings as the clear backup if he's got a road to be a starter on another team that isn't god-awful, and the Colts aren't god-awful. We'll see about that. But when we talked about the Vikings quarterback position in our first positional analysis, Dave, several weeks ago, we got into the backup quarterback situation, and we talked about several options. One we did not talk about, but that is emerging now, is that Gardner Minshew. Hear me out on this one. Because Minshew is, it looks like he's going to get released by Las Vegas when free agency starts. And that was not on the board several weeks ago when we talked about the quarterback position. Well, if you look at Minshew, he is a guy that is, he's still youngish, but okay, he's not a mobile quarterback, and he doesn't have the strongest arm that you would like, but he has been productive at spots in his NFL career, at Jacksonville in particular, even 2 years ago with the Colts. He's got a ton of starting experience in the NFL, some good, some not so good. But he's been a backup and accepted that role in the past at Philly before he went to the Indianapolis Colts. And I don't think he's a guy that isn't going to cost a ton. You're probably looking at around the Darnold kind of spot, maybe less, as far as bringing him back. So, I think that he might be, he's potentially an option out there. If you look at the other free agent quarterbacks who would be, who are set to be free agents, who are free agents right now, that the Vikings would consider besides Daniel Jones, other than Aaron Rodgers, Jimmy Garoppolo, and Darnold himself, I guess. But other than those guys, maybe Carson Wentz you could consider, but Wentz really hasn't done anything productive since 2017, so I don't know. But besides those guys, like Minshew's got a better, or about just as good or a better professional resume as a quarterback in the NFL than just about every guy that's out there. So would the Vikings consider him? I think he could be an option. Just a name to keep in mind over the next couple of days as the Vikings look for a backup quarterback for J.J. McCarthy. I think that he'd be a better option than bringing Nick Mullins back, but we'll see about that. Not as good an option as Daniel Jones, but better than a lot of the others that are out there. And he's not going to cost a lot to bring in.
Hey, like I said, there's rumors Kirk, if he gets released, he could come back. It wouldn't cost anything. Vet minimum.
No. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense football wise. I don't think it makes a lot of sense in a lot of other ways.
Because the way the fans are fractured on him.
Yes.
No.
Just major awkward to have that happening. And you don't want that when you're trying to nurture a second-year quarterback who you say is your franchise guy. That's just not going to happen. The same reason that Aaron Rodgers being a dark horse to go to the Vikings, come on.
Definition of locker room cancer. No.
Even if he wasn't, if you're Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Rodgers, his ego will not allow him to go to any team, I think, as a backup ever. And he's certainly not going to the Vikings, a team he terrorized and trolled for years, as the backup. That ain't happening. He might come here as a starter and do the Brett Favre thing, but he's not coming there to be sitting and whisper sweet nothings into J.J. McCarthy's ear as McCarthy's out there on the field. Just is not happening.
No, and the whole culture thing would be out the window if they did that. It's not going to happen.
Oh, Aaron, no, it's okay. You can go on your retreat during OTAs and training camp. You can come to training camp 2 weeks late. Yeah, no, that's okay. No problem, buddy. Sorry, not into that.
Anthony Tullison said he'd rather have James T. Kirk as our QB. The original William Shatner, who's 90 years old. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, Tony says if Kirk or Rodgers ends up on the team, he's done. It would be a bunch of pissed off people, Tony. Oh, we'd rant for weeks, probably all season long.
But it'd keep the Vikings in the news cycle for a long, long time.
And it gets people fired is what it would do.
Yeah.
But, all right. Now, on to the next topic. Trades for Chicago.
Yeah, the Bears. Why are we talking about this? Well, because the Bears this week traded for not one, but two interior linemen. They got Jonah Jackson from the Rams, and then they traded and got Joe Thuney from the Kansas City Chiefs. And normally I wouldn't care too much about that, but it impacts the Vikings because the Vikings, we know, need to do something about their offensive line on the interior, particularly at the guard position. So the Bears would be one of the teams they would have been competing for free agents for at those positions. And the Bears have had more cap space than us. So they would have been serious competitors to guys like Will Freeze and James Daniels and Brandon Sheriff or whoever you're looking at the guard position. Well, now presumably they are not going to be interested in those guys in free agency. I guarantee they won't be. They still need a center possibly, but that might not be a Vikings target. But guards, they're not going to be active for the top tier guys in free agency right now. And draft wise, say the Vikings, depending on how free agency shakes out, that they aren't happy with how they addressed the interior or how that went on the offensive line. Maybe they're looking at drafting somebody high in the first round at 24, or if they trade down a bit. The Bears aren't going to be in the market for that in guard either, I think, in the first or second round. So there's still lots of teams that are going to be looking for interior guys and offensive linemen all across the board. So the Vikings still have lots of competition, but I think it's a little bit of a help that the Bears have been eliminated from the guard market in free agency and the draft, I think. And in a league that's as competitive as the NFL, any little help the Vikings can get to get their guys that they want on the interior of the offensive line is good news for Vikings fans and good news for the Minnesota Vikings. So, and the other thing is that, at least in one case, I'm not convinced that Jonah Jackson is going to help the Bears solve their pass blocking, run blocking woes. He couldn't beat out his competition in LA last year when they brought him on as a free agent. So I don't know how good of a get he is. Joe Thuney, on the other hand, is a pretty good get for the Bears and is going to help them, which we don't like here in Vikings land.
Position flexibility. Jonah Jackson could play a little bit of center. Thuney obviously got moved out to tackle because their tackle got hurt and did a remarkable job. Joe Thuney's a very, very good lineman. He's getting up there in age, but very, very good.
Mm-hmm.
Now, MP, bear down. I have the Bears representative, Pay, from the Frustrated Chicago Sports Fan channel, that I do Who Will Be King on Wednesdays. And I'm hosting this week, and it's going to be a blast because we'll be an hour in to free agency when we do it. But Pay said, hey, they're good signings. They need to improve their O-line. Their O-line was horrendous, and they like the signings. But he goes, he's been there before, where the Chicago Bears win the offseason.
Yeah.
He goes, I don't want the same results as every time we're declared we're winning the offseason. I don't blame him, but I hope they end up with the exact same results. And it's a big mess, and they go to Chicago to get ruined. But, hey, that's because we're in the same division, and we don't wish success on anybody else in the division, and especially the Packers. So,
yes,
they can beat the Packers. Lions can beat the Packers. But other than that, I wish them all the failure luck they can get.
You're such a nice guy, Dave.
hey, honest. I'm honest.
Yeah.
So it is what it is. Well, that brings an end to this week in Vikings land. Next week is going to be rocking, like I just alluded to. We go into the legal tampering period tomorrow at 3 o'clock Central, and the new league year starts Wednesday at 3 o'clock Central, and that's when we can start signing players. So it's going to be a blast this weekend, and news will come hot and heavy and fast. So now on to theme 3. The defense.
Yes, we're only a few hours away from legal tampering period and free agency kicking off. And so based on schedule and me being in Mexico for a week, we haven't gotten to the defense as soon as I had hoped for our positional analysis. We hadn't got into the defenses at all. So strap in, folks. We're going to go over the entire defense here in this last segment. So we got a lot to get to.
But before we get there, I want to address what people have talked about. Anthony Tollison reminded us that the Lions released Zadarius Smith today. So, which probably means he's going to the Bears to complete the circuit. But we'll find out. But they announced, I think it was yesterday, they extended Marcus Davenport for, I think it was up to 4.3 or something. Million. I'm sure it's veteran minimum plus incentives, but
which he will not reach because he will be on the IR by game 3.
I asked my buddies, what's the over and under before he's on IR?
Yeah.
They didn't give me an answer.
Oh, but it's interesting that Davenport, like every year, the amount of money he's getting just getting less and less. So I think he signed 1 year for $13 million with the Vikings 2 years ago, and then it was like $7 or $8 million for the Lions last year, and now they've re-upped him for like under $5, which is probably the least that they could sign him for because of the amount of years service he has in the NFL. And I say service loosely because, again, the guy is always on injured reserve and never plays a full season.
Ask our Saints guys. I think he had only one season, maybe one, or where one he had 9 games, something like that. And he was injured all the rest.
A shame because for him anyway, and the teams that signed him, because he's a pretty good player, I think, when he plays, which is rarely these days.
But we don't have to worry about him coming to Minnesota. So
no.
Now, you wanted to talk about the defense, and you wanted to start off with the Brian Flores, which makes sense, and his NASCAR package.
Well, yeah, let's look at the defensive line first, Dave, and on that, which leads into the NASCAR package. But just looking at that, this is a unit that we've fans have talked about, and people who follow the team, that they've got to get better at, and they need a pass rushing presence there along the defensive line. They don't need a lot of guys here because a lot of the defensive downs and snaps, they're using one defensive lineman, if that. And Brian Flores instead uses the old NASCAR package where he's got 4 pass rushers, sometimes 4 edge rushers along the D line going at it. So you don't need a lot of these guys, but I think Brian Flores, if he actually had a defensive lineman that could rush the passer, he'd have him on the field a lot more than he does. But, first off, Harrison Phillips, who's basically our nose tackle, a good player, but he doesn't give you much as a pass rusher. But, he'll be back next year. He's signing a 2-year extension. He's a solid player. I like him. He does fit the defense well. He does perform a valuable role, just not valuable in the pass rushing side of things. You could also say the same thing. The 2 other guys that were starters last year alongside him, what are the Vikings going to do with Jerry Tillery and Jonathan Bullard? Well, Tillery is not coming back. He just did not make an impact, enough of an impact, didn't even have a sack last year. And by the end of the year, he had been replaced as a starter by Jalen Redmond. More on him later. As for Bullard, what are the Vikings going to do with Bullard? It's a good question because the Vikings obviously value what he does, which is being a wide body, occupy space, play on the rundowns. But he's another guy who gives you 0 as a pass rusher. However, he played 50% of the defensive snaps last year, Dave. That is not an insignificant number. And he didn't cost much. $2.25 million was what his salary cap was. Do the Vikings bring him back because they do value what he does? He keeps coming back. This was his 3rd year with the Vikings. They like what he does. The thing is, he's about to turn 32. Even if he's cheap, his better days are behind him. Doesn't give you much of a pass rush. I think Jalen Redmond is going to earn. I really liked what I saw from him last year. Explosive, can penetrate, has got a knack for batting down passes at the line of scrimmage. He's going to be a starting defensive end for the Vikings next year, I believe. and he's going to take Tillery's spot. Is Bullard coming back? I don't think that he is, but that I think depends a bit on particularly what I think a couple other guys do. Redmond being one, but also Levi Drake Rodriguez, and then even Taki Taimani, who would be your nose tackle, but not a defensive end. But Levi Drake Rodriguez last year, Dave, he was always going to be a project, 7th rounder out of Texas A&M Commerce, I think. But he didn't look bad in the preseason. I think he's had a year of development. I expect that he is going to be in the defensive line rotation in year 2, starting off 10 to 15 defensive snaps and getting more if he earns it. And this year, Alec Lewis from The Athletic was talking about players that he'd heard about at the NFL Combine, and Viking staff that he'd talked to said that Levi Drake Rodriguez, the arrow is pointing way up for him, according to them. So I think that the Viking staff think that he is going to play a much more important role on the defensive line and on the defense in 2025 than he did in 2024, which was a redshirt year for him, for sure. Taki Taimani, he's going to be, I think, interesting guy, because I think that he made the team last year as an undrafted rookie free agent. He looked good in preseason. The Vikings thought enough of him to have him as a start, to dress him for the first 7 games. He was getting, anywhere from 13 snaps to 6 or 7 snaps per game. So he had a minimal role, but a role. Then he hurt his ankle, never played again. But I do think that he's back, and he'll be backing up Phillips at the nose tackle position. And Redmond, I think, is going to start. Now, of course, the Vikings, those guys are not really. Redmond, as a pass rusher, I think has promise. All of those other guys do not. They do need to get somebody who can, collapse the pocket a bit, get pressure on the quarterback up the middle in particular. And I think that the Vikings, they're going to look to free agency to do that. There's been some guys that have fallen off the market since that. I mean, the big guy that everybody's talking about that the Vikings need to go after is Milton Williams from the Eagles. I like Milton Williams. He showed he's a hell of a pass rusher, Dave, but run defense is not his forte. His PFF grades on that are pretty horrible. Now, that's not his main job, though. But he's never been a full-time guy. He's never even played 50% of the defensive snaps with the Eagles in any of his time there. And yet, like PFF is projecting that he might average in free agency $20 million per year, $21 million per year. I don't know if he's going to get that, but
before the playoffs, when we were looking at him, he was in the 11 to 13 million range, which was understandable.
Yes. I don't think 20 to 21 million is understandable. Like, I understand
not for a guy that plays 50% of the time.
Well, not even. He had 47% of the defensive snaps last year for the Eagles he played. Now, the big defensive guys don't play, most of the time they don't play 80 to 90% of the defensive snaps, but 47% is pretty minimal for a guy that you are going to be paying $21 million per year for. I don't know if I'd be comfortable with that. I don't think the Vikings will be. If he was the only...
If I was his agent, I'd say, hey, Myles Garrett got $40 million a year. Mm-hmm. I'm only asking for half of that.
I feel, people remember the last thing that they saw. They saw what he did in the Super Bowl. He did plenty before that, but the market is going to be robust for Milton Williams. I think the Vikings should be out on Milton Williams, though. I don't think that he's going to be enough of a difference maker for the money it's going to cost to sign him. Now, if the Vikings do sign him, I'll live with it. I'll be fine. I think he would help us, but at that cost, maybe a little bit too rich for my blood. Some other guys, though, that I think I would be in on would be one guy they know very well, set to be a free agent, Levi Onwuzurike. I always have trouble pronouncing that. But now, yes, he's never had more than a sack and a half in a season. That's not very much. But last year he had 47 defensive pressures from the defensive line position. He's 27. He's coming off his rookie contract. Those are the kind of players the Vikings under Kwesi Adofo-Mensah typically have targeted in free agency in the past couple of years, 3 years. I think that he's a guy that the Vikings are going to look very closely at, and a lot of other teams too, but they know him well. You sign him, you weaken a divisional rival. That's always, that's always a good thing too. It's a guy to keep an eye on. Another guy that's been mentioned to the Vikings, older than Levi, but still maybe more of a sure thing, would be BJ Hill from the Bengals. Maybe like a guy who's very strong against the run, but also has some pass rushing juice. Has had between 3.5 to 5.5 sacks in the last 4 years. Yeah, he's 30 years old, but he has not shown that he's slowing down. I think he's a guy that wouldn't cost as much as some of the other guys, the top guys in the run, and he could still be a big help to the Vikings in the pass rush and in run defense. He's a guy I really like. Now, in the draft, a lot of what the Vikings are going to target in the draft age, we know, is going to be predicated on what they do in free agency. If they aren't satisfied with how they've addressed the defensive line, then in free agency, then the drafting a guy at 24, or even if you trade down a little bit, that's going to be more in play. So we'll see. But I think this does feel like a year where the Vikings are going to pick a defensive lineman high in the draft. They haven't done it since 2013. Sharif Floyd was the last time they picked a defensive lineman in the first round or the second round, I believe. And that's like a long, long time ago. I think this year is the year where you're going to see it. We know that they met with Derek Harmon from Oregon at the Combine. He's certainly what I've seen projected. We talked about it a couple of weeks ago, but projected he should be there at 24, and he wouldn't be a reach at 24. Maybe even if you trade it down a little bit, you could get him at 26 or 27 or 28. Maybe not in the second round, but it's hard to say sometimes. But certainly he'd be there at 24. Would Mason Graham from the Michigan be there at 24? Debatable, but he's got shorter arms. Teams aren't sure about his body composition, whether he's got the length that they're looking for. But if he's there at 24, he'd be tough to pass up. Walter Nolan, you talked about him, Dave. You really like this kid. I don't think he's going to be there that late in the draft, but certainly if he were to fall, the Vikings could not pass up on him, I think, even though he does have some, I heard, bad tape. There's some talk about character issues. I don't know. He had, 8.5 sacks last year at Ole Miss from the defensive, in the interior.
Interior, yeah.
Yeah, and as great, like almost Aaron Donald-like athletic traits, you can work with that. So those are guys that I think you would be, Nolan less likely to be there at 24, but certainly Harmon and Mason Graham, that type of player, the Vikings would jump all over that if they were. I think
Graham isn't making it out of the top 10. I think you're thinking of Grant.
Kenneth Grant?
Kenneth Grant.
Yeah, I felt what I was reading is that he might go before Graham would be, but
no, Graham is the freak. He's going. But that's how I understand it. But we'll see. Yeah,
we'll see.
They're probably both gone before we get to 24. So
yeah. And this is a year, like we've talked about before, defensive line very deep in the draft. If the Vikings don't get a guy in the first round, late in the first round, or if they trade down out of the first round and into the second round, then you're probably looking at, I think they will address it at some point, and probably around the third round in that comp pick. And at that point, maybe you're looking at maybe Ty Robinson from Nebraska, a grinder who doesn't have impressive athletic traits, but was very productive last year. Is he an option? Jordan Birch from Oregon, teammate of Derek Harmon's, had 8.5 sacks last year at Oregon, but a lot of draft experts don't think that he's an iffy prospect. But with that kind of pass rushing potential in the third round, hey, the Vikings might be interested. He's 6'6", he's long, he's got a lot of traits that you like. Those kind of guys that are like the second tier, the Vikings will certainly look at, and they might even double down and pick a couple of defensive tackles in the draft, depending on how many draft picks they end up with. Alec Lewis, who we talked about before, he had a mock earlier this week, and he had them getting Darius Alexander, who might not be a first rounder at like, in the first round. And then they picked Norman Lott he had the Vikings picking Norman Lott from Tennessee in the 5th round. Norman Lott's kind of an undersized guy, but a very good pass rusher from Tennessee. So some names to think about. That's your defensive line, though. I think free agency, the Vikings go and get one guy, but they're also going to target it in the draft for another potential starter there if they can. Moving on to edge. This one's less exciting, Dave. Don't think we're going to see a lot of movement there at all. Grenard and Van Ginkel are locked in as starters. And I think Dallas Turner, he's going to be your number 3 edge rusher, giving those guys a break when they need it, or being involved in the NASCAR packages even more so than he was last year in 2024. The question is, though, the Vikings, depth, they got to watch out for it. And they've got a decision to make on Patrick Jones III, free agent, who was their number 3 guy on the depth chart as an edge rusher last year. And then Jihad Ward, also, who was kind of played a defensive line, but also an edge rusher role. He was in on the NASCAR packages all the time, but on the interior. The Vikings are going to have to decide whether they're bringing those guys back or replacing them. I think Jones is a goner. Like Dave, you were waving bye-bye to him because, the stats look not bad. He had a career high 7 sacks last year, but just too many games where he disappears, where you don't see him, you don't notice him. He doesn't do anything for games and games and games. And then he'll have a game like he did against Tennessee where he gets a couple of sacks and he's all over the place. You always call him the cleanup artist.
Yep.
And he's kind of a similar player to DJ Wanham, who was the same sort of player who would get you 7 or 8 sacks per year. But a lot of times the sacks were because he was unblocked or the other guy created the pressure and he just kind of looped around and cleaned up. Well, DJ Wanham went to Carolina last year because the Vikings just felt that they could do better. Better was Jones and Dallas Turner. And this year, better is going to be, Dallas Turner for one. And then I think there's an opportunity for your number 4 guy. You potentially could be Gabe Murphy, Bo Richter, the undrafted rookie free agents from last year. I think that those guys are going to get an opportunity to be the 4th guy coming off the bench, off the sideline as your 4th edge rusher. I think Murphy would be seems like the best option to me. He played at UCLA, had 2 strong years there, was expected to get drafted, didn't. But I wouldn't.
Because of short arms.
Yeah, because of short arms, didn't get drafted, was very productive in all college and all his years. But I wouldn't count out Bo Richter. I found him very impressive in preseason when he got to play. The Vikings thought enough of him to keep him on the roster, played on special teams a lot. He's had a year to develop, refine him, get stronger, refine his pass rushing plan. He's a guy to keep an eye on as maybe even leapfrogging Murphy, who was injured most of last year, as the 4th edge rusher behind Dallas Turner on our team. Now, replacing Ward, again, I don't know if the Vikings are going to go there, but the one guy I would be interested in is kind of taking Ward's role on free agency is Dayo Odangbo from the Colts. He's played in the 4-3 his whole career at the Colts, but he's 6'6". He's listed at 280, similar size, actually a little bit taller than Jihad Ward, but about the same weight. But he's a guy, he had 8 sacks in 2023. He had 5 sacks in 2022. Last year he fell off, lost his role in the Colts, but I think because of that, he's going to be undervalued. And he could play on the inside and be an interior guy in those NASCAR packages that I think could really create a lot of problems for opponents. If he's willing to come to the Vikings at the right price, the Vikings should be interested in him and seeing what his price might be. And if he'd be happy with the role that the Jihad Ward
rotation.
Yes, as a rotational guy, which He was last year with the Colts. He lost his starting spot there, and he wasn't really playing as much as he had in previous years. I'm sure he's looking for a fresh start, and Minnesota has been a nice place to take that fresh start for other free agents recently. So that's your edge rusher. I don't expect them to target an edge rusher in the draft at all. Certainly not with only 3 or 4 draft picks right now. But even if they get, say, 5 or 6 or 7 through various trades, I don't know if we go there. But if we do, it'd be very late in the draft.
I agree.
Certainly they're going to pick up guys and the undrafted guys and bring in a couple, but no, those names won't be ones that we'll be very familiar with. Inside linebacker, kind of like edge, not seeing a lot of movement there. Blake Cashman, great signing last year, and Ivan Pace Jr. are your starters. And kind of like the defensive line, because Flores often only uses one on-the-ball linebacker on various downs, you don't need a ton of inside linebackers with the Vikings in their 3-4. But depth is a concern. Cashman got hurt, missed a couple of games last year. Ivan Pace missed 5 or 6. Injuries do happen. You do need some quality depth there. The Vikings, I don't think, have that right now. Brian Asamoah, he played less last year on defense than he did as a rookie. That is not a good sign for him. But I still think that he'll be back on the roster.
He's one of those guys out of the 2022 draft class.
Yep. I do think he'll be back next year, at least until final cuts. So I don't see the Vikings releasing him now. I think he'll be around. He does play a lot of special teams. He's a valuable part of those units, at least. But he's not a guy that the Vikings obviously trust to play any kind of meaningful defensive snaps. That's a problem. Grugier Hill, last year, initially the Vikings did trust him. When Pace got hurt early, they turned to Grugier Hill to take his snaps. He seemed like he did pretty well, but by the end of the year when Cashman got hurt, Grugier Hill did not see the field very much. Flores ended up turning to Metellus to play the inside linebacker role more than him. I don't think Grugier Hill will be back next year, but you do need to replace him with somebody who can go in for Pace Jr. or Cashman in case they get hurt. And one guy that I would keep my eye on, or to me anyway, it makes a lot of sense for the Vikings, would be Landon Roberts. He was with the Steelers the past couple of years, but he played under Brian Flores when Roberts got drafted by the Patriots back in 2016. He played under Flores when Flores was the head coach in Miami. Inside linebacker, a run stuffer, not a guy that's on the field on passing downs. So he can rush the passer. Would he be willing to come to Minnesota as the backup, but the first guy off the bench if somebody gets hurt when he's 31 years old? We'll see, but I'd be checking on him if I were the Vikings and someone to keep an eye on. If they don't get him, I don't know who they use. Maybe they bring back Grugier Hill, but his PFF grades were I think the worst of any Vikings defensive player who played any significant snaps last year. So there's some questions about what he can do on the field.
Right. It may be they target it in the draft or further down. That we could use a inside linebacker 3, a good one, but
people are George is mentioning and a few others about Dre Greenlaw. I think I like Greenlaw as a player. Surprised that the 49ers, I guess, can't keep him because of cap reasons. Would he come to Minnesota as a backup after being a starter on an elite defense, though? And I'm sure Greenlaw feels he should still be a starter. I just don't see Greenlaw seeing Minnesota financially and playing time wise as a fit for him. But if he were to agree, I'd be like over the moon because I think Dre Greenlaw is a very good player when healthy.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't see it happening in Minnesota.
Yep.
Moving on to safeties. We're getting down to the end here, Dave. Yep. We talked about this earlier. Theo Jackson signing, I think, is a major, major move on how this is all going to shape up because, it looks like Bynum has priced himself out of Minnesota. Again, I'm okay with that because I think Jackson can replicate what Bynum can do on the field, and the Vikings can always find someone else to choreograph turnover celebrations if needed. So, you got Theo Jackson as your free safety. Josh Metellus, listed as a safety again, but I call him a football player because that's what he does, right? Like, he's on the defensive line. He's on the ball linebacker, slot corner, safety,
joker,
blitzer.
rover.
A joker, rover, however you want to call it. He is listed as a safety. We know wherever he plays, he's going to play a ton next year. And because, he's just evolved into a key piece on the Brian Flores defense, but he's one of the three safeties that's going to be on the field a lot of the time. I think a lot with Theo Jackson. And then with Bynum gone, what's up with Harrison Smith? I'm sure that we haven't heard whether he's retired or he's not going to retire. I feel confident that he has told Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell what his plans are, because they've got the plan. They've got to hit the ground running tomorrow with a replacement plan if he isn't coming back. So they know what he's going to do. And at the end of last year, we talked about it on the show. After the Vikings lost in the Rams, he was so down. He sounded like a guy who was done with football. But then lately, again, Alec Lewis says he's been hearing that, he feels that Smith is going to come back. I heard that from a couple other Vikings beat writers in the past couple of weeks who've been saying the same thing, that I believe
Doogie Wolfson has alluded to that as well. Mm-hmm.
That they believe Hitman is going to come back for his 14th season. So if he does, he's not the Hitman of 2015 or 2016-17, but he still had a PFF grade of 68 point something last year. And he's still a player who's good. He's a quality player. And if he's coming back for his 14th season, Brian Flores is going to play him 1,000 defensive snaps again, and he's going to be a fine player for us, and he's going to be the starting strong safety. So you're going to have Metellus, Jackson, and Smith as your starting safeties. Now, if he doesn't come back, and it's looking like he will, but if he doesn't come back, then the Vikings got some work to do. People have been pointing out that Javon Holland, he's a guy that you got to go after. And I'd love it, but because he's 25, but he's not going to come cheap. No. He does play. He is a multiple kind of guy like Metellus who can do a lot of things. He can blitz. He can play on the ball. He can play deep safety. He can do a lot of things. He's very athletic. I'd love to have Javon Holland on my team. I just think he's going to go at a price in free agency that's going to be quite high. And also, I don't know if it's a deal breaker, but he's a free safety. Not a strong safety. I don't know if there's, if that's a problem. Like the Vikings with Vikings.
Most
is it interchangeable?
Flip flop, but yes, the strong safety is considered the unbox safety. Whereas the free safety is the back end. Mm-hmm. So now, as I understood it, Theo Jackson was Smith's understudy. Now, I could be wrong. He could have been Bynum's. But where they plan on playing him, he's built better, I think, in the back, because you want a small linebacker or a more, athletic linebacker type in the strong safety position. But it should be interesting. And I agree. Holland would go great back there. We'll see what happens.
We will. If the Vikings do have to replace Hitman, and I'm happy with them coming back with Hitman again. I think that, and they'll work out the financials on that to make it palatable for the Vikings and for him. But if that doesn't happen, if he retires, and Holland isn't in play for the Vikings or he prices his stuff out, there's lots of, I think, good quality safeties who are set to be free agents this week. Justin Reed's one of the top ones from Kansas City, and another guy who, like Holland, can do multiple things for you: play in the box, play deep, cover in the slot, blitz. Flores would love that. I mean, Jeremy Chin is kind of more of a downhill, I think, play in the box type safety, but he's available and he's had some strong years. He had a comeback last year with the Commies. I'm surprised the commies are not bringing him back, but maybe they still will. And then Julian Blackmon from the Colts is another guy whose name has been thrown out there as a potential fit for the Vikings at strong safety. And he's a guy who wouldn't be, I think, as costly as Javon Holland would be and Justin Reed would be. And that might be more in the Vikings' wheelhouse because, yeah, they got a lot of cap space, Dave, but like last year in free agency, how they approached it was Grenard was the big money signing, but Van Ginkel and Cashman, who were wonderful signings too, didn't sign for big money. Now the Vikings have more cap space this year, but they don't have limited amount of cap space. There's so many, maybe they can have 2 big money signings, but then they got to go for value and get guys who are not going to cost a ton, but are still going to play well. And Julian Blackmon, I feel, is a kind of guy who could be in that not outrageously priced, but still give you quality play at the safety position. But again, some names there. And again, in the draft, just like with the inside linebacker and edge, I don't think with the Vikings needs at running back, although it's not as big of a need today because you signed Aaron Jones back, but at offensive line, even defensive line, corner, I don't know if safety is a spot that they are going to really target early in the draft. And Jay Ward is a guy that I know Drew Bunting, and we haven't seen Drew for a few weeks, but Drew Bunting does not like Jay Ward. But remember what I said about developing safeties. Jay Ward, I think, is going to play a much bigger role in the Vikings defense in 2025 than he has the previous 2 years. He's had 2 years to develop, learn under Bynum, Hitman, Josh Metellus. He's another guy that former corner. I think he's going to be your 4th safety in the room, the guy who will come in if somebody gets injured next year or somebody needs a little bit of a break. I think Jay Ward is a guy that is going to play, as I said, I'm expecting him to be the latest Viking safety that we have drafted and developed and are grooming to be a starter when maybe Hitman retires after the 2025 season. Watch out for Jay Ward and what how he does in OTAs, if he's mentioned in training camp, how much he plays in preseason and how much of an impact he has. He might alleviate some of the concerns about depth at the safety position. Finally, the corners. We got a lot of work to do here, Dave. Yeah. A lot of work to do here. Byron Murphy Jr., Stephon Gilmore, Shaq Griffin, Fabian Moreau, all free agents. So you probably need to find 4 new, you've either got to re-sign those guys or find replacements to them. Byron Murphy Jr., I was hoping that the Vikings could work out a deal to bring him back because I like the age he's at 27. He just had the best year of his career. He's a guy who can play in the slot or outside. And that's important. And he knows the Brian Flores defense very well, and he loves Minnesota. But here we are again, a few hours from free agency of the legal tampering period, and no deal for him yet. And
which
when guys
indications point to him going to play someplace else and making it back.
Yeah. When guys hit the open market, they usually don't come back to the team that let them hit the open market. And I think that's going to be the case with Byron Murphy. And that leaves a big, big hole at corner for the Vikings because Stephon Gilmore, I don't think is coming back. Shaq Griffin, very unlikely he's coming back either, but maybe Griffin would on another 1-year deal, which I'd be okay with, but I don't see either of those 2 coming back to the Vikings. So, and I don't think Monroe is coming back either. He was kind of a veteran, deep depth guy that ended up playing a bit more than maybe we expected or wanted. So again, 4 you got to bring back. How are you going to attack that? Especially, if Byron Murphy Jr. is going to riches somewhere else. Well, there are some good names out there, but one thing is that I think is that let's keep in mind Mekhi Blackmon, who sat out last year with the torn LCL. I believe very firmly he's going to be one of the top 3 cornerbacks that the Vikings play a lot. The question is he going to be outside or strictly slot? His size coming out of college, he's about 5'10", 180, suggested that he was only fit for a slot. But he played outside in his rookie year quite a bit. So I'm not sure about that. But if he isn't your slot guy, then you need a slot guy. You don't have one. And I think if we need a slot guy, I'm calling up Mike Hilton and saying, come to Minnesota, baby. I know he's 31, but I have always loved Mike Hilton as a football player. He's tough. He's a hell of a blitzer off corner blitzes, and he can cover guys. Maybe his best football is not ahead of him, but at 31, 1 or 2 year deal, if you need a slot corner, he's the guy I'm trying to bring here. And hopefully it won't cost too much. On the outside, there's some intriguing options. Carlton Davis from the Lions would be, again, if he's out there, Kwesi, and you can't bring back Byron Murphy Jr., go get Carlton Davis. I like his size. He's tough. He's a guy who loves playing press man. He had a very good year with Detroit last year. Again, you're bringing up a guy who can weaken a divisional rival. He's still only 28 years old. Lots of good football ahead of him. Kwesi, go get Carlton Davis. I think we'll all be happy with what we got. Opposite of him, a guy that I'm very interested in would be Paulson Adebo from the Saints. Coming off a broken femur last year, so there's the potential that teams are concerned about the injury, and that might lead him to be had for a price that's less than maybe he would have got if he was fully healthy last year. But he's check this out: 28 passes defensed and 7 interceptions in his last 22 games. 6'1", 190 pounds, got the size that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Brian Flores are looking for from their corners. Again, he's a guy who can play press man, and a guy who's not afraid to make plays on the ball. Will he give up some big plays? Yes, but he also makes a lot of big plays. I think that he's going to be undervalued a bit. I would be very interested in bringing him to Minnesota as well, if you could. And another kind of a dark horse, really undervalued, somebody potentially kick the tires on in free agency would be, and we know the Vikings, every year they got to sign their obligatory Green Bay Packer. So in free agency, Eric Stokes, he had a strong rookie year in 2021. He has not been able to follow that up, particularly because of injuries in 2022 and 2023. And last year he basically lost a lot of playing time to others. But again, I'd be interested in kicking the tires on this. Former first-round pick, had a strong rookie year, going to be, I think, very undervalued in free agency. Would he be interested in coming to Minnesota, an opportunity to be the number 3, number 4 cornerback and rebuild his career in a Brian Flores defense? Very interested in that. I think you got DJ Reed up here, an obvious candidate for the Vikings as a target. A very good player, very good cornerback. He's going to cost something, but if you got him and didn't get Carlton Davis, I would not be displeased at all. I don't want to forget about Dwight McLaughlin either, because he's another guy that, along with Levi Drake Rodriguez and Mekhi Blackman, actually, that Alec Lewis from the Athletic, and I've mentioned him about 20 times now, but Lewis, in an article last week, said at the combine, McLaughlin is a player who's, again, his arrow amongst Vikings staff is pointing up. And that kind of matches what I saw last year when he played in preseason, and even the brief amount of time he got in defensive snaps in garbage time late in the season, is that he did not look out of place. He looked confident out there. And again, a year development. There is potentially some opportunity there for him to slide up move up the depth chart a bit, because depending on what we do in free agency, if we don't get, round out our depth, our cornerback room, like the Vikings hope, because of various reasons, McLaughlin eases that, because he is showing the staff that he is ready to take a step to be a contributor on the Vikings defense at the NFL level, even though he was never drafted.
It's going to be interesting to see how this man puts it together this year. Now, let's say hi to Sarah. Sarah, you missed the whole first segment when we were talking about Sam Darnold coming back and Kirk Cousins coming back and Aaron Rodgers coming back. Your radar must be off. But I'm glad to have you have you here?
Oh well, that did well. I guess Sarah's clock didn't change either today. I think that's the issue there, maybe too. But but anyway, I think
Sarah knows
again,
how I feel about the quarterbacks.
yes, she does. But on the draft wise, do we target cornerback during the draft? I think we will. How early we do again depends on what happens in free agency. We're not happy. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and the personnel team are not happy with how completely happy with how our depth is looking like after free agency. Well, then I think cornerback is very much in play early in the draft. And the Vikings have met with Trey Amos from Ole Miss at the combine. They met with Dorian Strong from Virginia Tech at the combine. So potential options there. Those guys aren't really projected to go in the first round, but they're kind of in the second round from what I've been seeing. One guy who is projected to go in the first round and I've seen mocked to the Vikings a bunch of times is Texas's Jada Barron. And I've heard a couple of interviews from him, and I'm really impressed by what I heard him talk about at the combine. Seems like a very smart football player, but also a football player who's been very productive, at the college football level. And yeah, he's been mocked to the Vikings a bunch of times because they do have a needed corner, and he's one of the best corners in college football, and it would be a great fit because with Brian Flores, Dave, when he became the defensive coordinator in Minnesota, everybody talked about how he's going to blitz like hell, which he has, but also that he's going to play man coverage behind that and press coverage. Well, he's played way more zone than man coverage in the 2 seasons he's been defensive coordinator, probably more by necessity than design. But if you're looking at corners in free agency and in the draft, I think you got to look at guys who aren't scheme specific, like can only play best suited in zone or best suited in man to man. I think Flores, what he's shown is that he's not married to a certain kind of type of defensive coverage. It's whatever works with the personnel he has. And I think he wants guys that can play both, which makes a lot of sense. So, and Barron do both.
I agree. I think he likes options.
Mm-hmm.
And he likes to rearrange the chessboard, and players that can do both maximize those options.
So there you have it. Geez, we did the whole defense.
I know.
I'm exhausted. Hopefully everybody who's watching the show are not, but they probably are. Darren, shut up.
Well, reminder, tomorrow at 3:00 Central, the legal tampering period opens, and we can hear, 3 minutes after it opens, player X agrees to terms with the Minnesota Vikings.
Yes.
Because it takes them 3 minutes to talk and write up a contract. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I know. I drip with sarcasm on this.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yes. But it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Just watch across the league. It's going to happen. But hopefully we hear Sam Darnold agreed to contract with the Seattle Seahawks. Cool.
4 years, $200 million, because that's going to really help that comp pick formula for the Vikings.
Yep. So, hey, any last words there, buddy?
Well, just going to be like the next week's going to be jam-packed with Vikings news and NFL news, and we love it. So get your, get clicked into your seatbelt and get ready, because it's going to be a wild ride here over the next 3-4 days. Looking forward to it. And we all hope that the Vikings are successful in free agency in 2025 as they were in 2024, because last year's free agent class is going to be tough to top. But the Vikings sort of do need to at least match it if they're going to go where we want them to go next season.
Yes. And we want overall to get better. So let's do that.
Yeah, no, indeed. I just can't wait to see if anything that I've blabbered on about here over the past month is going to be somewhat correct. I did hit on a few last year, Dave. You and I did.
Yes, you did.
We were pretty proud of that, but maybe this year I'm going to be completely off base. Like there'll be no Van Ginkel and Grenard that I guessed right, because this is, for me, it's educated guesses is what I'm making, and some of them aren't that educated either. I gotta admit.
And Norsefius, I saw the bring Drew on with his big board. I wrote it down, and I will contact Drew as we get closer to the draft. We just might do that. Get the three of us together.
It is on the agenda.
Mm-hmm. So, hey, everybody, I want you to stay safe. Enjoy your friends. Good beverage. Enjoy the weather if you can. I know there's a wicked storm coming across the Central Plains Thursday and Friday, but stay safe. Buckle in, like Darren says, because free agency is upon us. And then Wednesday starts the new league year. Happy New Year on that. And Vikings First and SKOL will be here for all of it. Monday night, expect Darren, or not Darren, but Tyler and the Real Forno show. Tuesday, don't know, we're being bumped out to Thursday. Sal wants to put, because of free agency, a show together for Thursday. We'll have probably one or two shows on Thursday or more. May have one on Tuesday or on Thursday, may have one on Tuesday. Going to guarantee to have one on two on Wednesday. We'll have the Who Will Be King and then Tyler again. And it's just going to be a wild, wild week. And we want you here with all of us as we go through it, and hopefully full, a heart full of football happiness as we build our team. So what do we say there, Darren?
We say, SKOL Vikings, baby.
SKOL Vikings.
Like, subscribe, and ring the bell, and rate us on your favorite podcast aggregator. Darren and Dave, thank you for watching this episode of Two Old Bloggers. We look forward to seeing you on every show on the new Vikings First and SKOL. You can find our podcast as part of the Fans First Sports Network. Sports takes for the fan, from the fan. SKOL, everybody!